It's summer in Japan, and we know that because I can hear my mic picking up the sound of cicadas outside my house. The deafening sound of cicadas in Japan. It's a sound that Japanese people associate with summertime. And I've come to do it too. I guess I've kind of sort of picked that up. I do enjoy the sound, but I don't know. You can hear them on the mic here.
Yeah, I had a big one drop on my head today when I was outside.
Oh, really?
He burnt himself out, and then he wound up on the ground after he bounced off my head.
Yeah, they're these big, ugly things, but I've kind of gotten used to them.
They're only around for a little while, and then they disappear.
Yeah, they make a lot of noise, though. If you go into some of these parks where there are a lot of trees, man, It's like almost a deafening sound. Really amazing.
Signs of summer.
Yeah, the sound of summer. We got that summer heat, too, but surprisingly not terribly humid, which is very nice. Actually, I'm one of these rare people who enjoy the hot weather. People are all around me complaining, "Oh, it's so hot, I can't go out." But I rather like it when it's hot. I'm not a winter person at all.
Today was 37, just about. That's what for American listeners. 98.6, really. The body temperature almost 99. It was burning up.
That should be an FM radio station, not the temperature.
Yeah, good old FM days.
98.7 plays all the hits.
Yeah, grew up with that FM radio. Well, it's the sounds of summer here on the Adult Music Podcast, and we're on episode 74. Got any new listeners? We just want to let you know that in the episode description, you find links for Spotify and Apple Music for all the music we're going to talk about tonight. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, our preferred streaming platform. You can also follow us there. And if you don't see the full description or list on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, come over to our host site, Podbean, podbean.com. You'll be able to find link access for all of the streaming locations. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe on whatever app or platform you listen to us on. If you take a moment, give us a ranking or write a short review. That helps us get listed in the browsing category recommendations, which helps us grow our audience, and we appreciate that. You can also now find us on Facebook. You can check out daily content. We upload some new releases. I had a bunch of them this week. New jazz coming out.
I didn't get any of the classical up. I got to start promoting my classical things up there.
Promote your classical. Other tidbits, interesting related information there. You can leave a comment there. You can see our handsome faces. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, you can get in touch by email as well at adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. And tonight we've got a special lineup. We've got an Italian explosion.
Oh, that's going to take some time to clean up.
Yeah, look at all that sauce.
Oh, sounds messy.
Ooh.
Oof. Anyway, it really was like that all week long. That Italian music exploding.
Yeah.
Out of the speakers.
We've got a big variety, all kinds of time periods and styles and everything tonight.
Yeah, I got to say that for me, generally, I started out, I used to work at NPR a long time ago. It was my first job out of college, and I got a job as a recording engineer. Shout out to Israel Smith, who got me the job. He's still on there, and I think he listens. So I just want to say to him, he got me that job, doing the mixing board for a show called Morning Baroque, and this kind of got me into the habit of listening to Baroque music in the morning. It was kind of a nice idea, and it turns out that it puts you in a good place for the rest of the day.
It's one of the few kinds of music I can listen to and do something else, and I find that it focuses rather than distracts me because of the predictability and logical structure of the music. So I can focus, get some caffeine, listen to that Baroque music. I can't listen to romantic era classical or something without being drawn into it deeper. But Baroque, I can kind of do two things at once with, and I also feel I get energy from it.
Yeah, I feel like I think that happens mostly because it's of the if you're listening to an orchestral or maybe like a chamber work. Tonight we're going to hear like lute and theorbo, which is kind of there's a lot of space in that. Yeah. But in Baroque music, there's this motor rhythm. There's just there are no pauses, and I kind of think that interlocking kind of theme against theme and all this stuff and the constant sort of like meshing together things, it does something good for your brain in the morning. I think it gets you started up. Gets
the squirrel running in the gerbil running in the wheel.
Yeah, the squirrels.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I think it's the ear equivalent of caffeine, of coffee. You know, I think, and I think coffee started to be drunk during the Baroque era too, or it was the Enlightenment after the Baroque. But they were about the same time, I think. Here I am showing, conflating history again and confusing my listeners, but look that up. Anyway, the coffee was the drink that fueled the Enlightenment. I do know that. Okay. There's an excellent book, by the way, for people who are interested in history, History of the World in 6 Glasses, and it talks about that. That's a really fantastic book. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, and I should look it up because it's not right to just say the name of the book and not give the author credit. Being an author myself, I would hate that. I'm going to type this in. Tom Standage. Okay. British author. It's really good. Recommended. All right. Anyway, so yeah, let's. We didn't really get the caffeinated Baroque music this week, but we got something really interesting to start out. The first Italian explosion. It's not quite an explosion, although it kind of is, I guess. The art of resonance. Archlute and Theorbo music of the Italian Seicento. I love that word, Seicento. The Seicento means the 1600s. Okay, and here's the funny thing. So the 1900s, when we were born, would be the Novecento. Now, I don't know what they call now. I have to ask someone. I should have done that before this podcast, but I didn't think about it. Anyway, the Seicento would be the 1600s. So instead of when we talk about the 1600s, we call that the 17th century. A little confusingly because, of course, the first century were the somethings or whatever, right? So then the first century would be, the second century would be the ones, and etc. So we call it the 7th century, but the Italians they just take the numbers, the 6, and they call it the Seicento, which is very cool, I think. Anyway, the art of resonance. This is music for archlute and theorbo. The archlute is a big lute, and the theorbo is also kind of a big lute, They have gigantically long necks with lots of strings on them. If you can look up some pictures of those, it's really amazing to me that people actually carry these things around. not ideal for wooing your lover on the beach. Let's just put that. Although the lute it's got a big body, but it's a good instrument for that. Anyway, the artist on this record is Luca Pianca, playing the archlute and theorbo. He is Swiss, born in Lugano. And so we've got that. And this is on the Passacaille label, which is based in Belgium. All right. The recording of this record was made in the Oratorio di San Rocco a Mano in Tustin, Switzerland. So we're calling this an Italian explosion. It is an Italian explosion. It's all Italian music, but it's a completely Swiss production here. The Italian part of Switzerland, of course.
Sounds like it was recorded in a giant underground cavern.
It's a big space, but it's not a bad recording. Okay, I rather enjoyed the recording. I'll get to that though in a minute. And I actually wrote the recording, mixing and mastering was by one guy, Andrea Dandolo. Okay, all right. So on this record we have 25 tracks, and the first 12 are played on the archlute, and then the rest, starting with the first 11 are played on the archlute, and starting at track 12, everything is played on the theorbo. Now, if these are new instruments to you, even better. Okay. All right. Let's start it out. We have a few works by Alessandro Piccinini, and one of the things I love about these kind of recordings is all these unfamiliar composers who just have these, they're all collected in these, they were published in these collections of the time, and lots of research has gone into this, and now we have all these composers that we don't know much about, and we get to hear their music. And I love music from this period. In fact, Italian I had mentioned that I worked at NPR, listened to Baroque music all the time, and my morning routine has really started to edge towards listening to Italian Baroque music, which is earlier. The Baroque started in Italy, and by the time we get to Handel and Bach, the Baroque era is towards its end. It's about to give way to what would eventually become the classical era, but there was a big transition period in between. But there's still a lot of Bach in there too. Bach has a lot of Italianate music himself. Okay, so it's all, I don't know, puts the brain in a good place. Anyway, these are a little more. These aren't as complex as those Bach works. They're sort of simple because they're and in a way, you could say more immediately appealing, just because they're simpler. They're easier to get a grasp of. Bach will kind of maintain your interest for a lot longer. That is your entire life. But so will these, though. But they're a little easier to kind of wrap your head around.
What I like about these too is, when you get in the later Baroque period, by the time you get to Bach, things are a lot more systematized, and they sort of set the expectations. We've talked about this before, of what we expect to hear in terms of especially the harmonic movement and voice leading. But this is still early enough that there's a lot of things that will surprise you in almost all of the pieces as it goes along. So you can see the difference from early Baroque into the later period.
Yeah, little harmonic surprises.
Yeah, I think they're still experimenting with, and I found that kind of refreshing in this recording too.
Yeah, there's some, actually, I think Bach kind of, in his Italian concerto, there's a piece for the harpsichord, or keyboard, piano. People play on the piano too. The Italian concerto, and the very first, the three movements are very famous. The first one has this really chirpy theme, and by the end, when it gets to the cadence at the end of the first theme of the tutti, I guess you would call it, it goes like, da da dun dun, and then there's this really dissonant chord that the piece just pauses on for a second, and then it leaves it and goes away, da 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 da, and you're just wondering, did that really just happen? And this music that we're going to hear today on this album, The Art of Resonance, is sort of like that too. There's a lot of that. Yeah. Did I just hear that sort of things going on? All right, so first of all, we have Alessandro Piccinini Toccata 20. They all have these rather boring titles like Toccata, Gagliarda, all these things, dances and techniques of the time. They're really just labels more than titles. Okay. All right, so I mentioned right at the beginning here, like what you said, there's a lot of room reverb on this recording, but I didn't feel like it was too much. The instrument and the details of the harmony are all clearly audible, and the attack makes an impact, even though this is a really gentle instrument. Maybe it could have been recorded a little closer, but it's close enough. This sounds good to my ears.
It's pretty close. You get the nice attack, but these instruments don't have a lot of sustain.
Yeah, and especially the Archlute.
That room space allows, the notes to carry out longer than they would if it were in a kind of deadened space. So it gives them a little bit
That's
more...
probably why they did that.
Yeah, flexibility with the phrasing, let things hang out into the air. So it's kind of a neat effect, yeah.
Right. Okay, softly played notes register really well. Very loud ones set off the room sound that you're in the space that's it's being recorded in. You can really hear those loud sounds sort of echo in the room. So this piece, Toccata 20, is one of these lovely pieces where technique is explored, and the real prize on this recording is going to be Pianca's phrasing. He's got a full tone. It's good, and with works like this, I mean, you could just play through them and they'll be, I guess, sort of boring, but Pianca makes them really come to life just by his the variety of phrasing he comes up with, these little sort of hesitations, these sort of before cadences or sections. He gets drama out of the material, and his sudden loud chords, he plays these sudden loud chords at key harmonic points in all of these pieces, and he makes these works, if not exciting, at least kind of like it'll make you listen. You're sort of wondering what's going to happen next, like you're listening to some sort of story that someone's telling, and that has a few surprise twists and turns in it. Pianca is really good at making these little oddities stand out. These sort of twists and turns. He's almost like a good storyteller, the way he plays. Okay, the second track, Toccata 15 by Piccinini, another toccata. Starts with a nice harp-like arpeggio, followed by arpeggiated chords. I like the very deliberate, ringing, plucked tone that Pianca gets on the repeated notes after the 1 minute and 20-second mark, which is a nice rhetorical touch to what could be simply figuration. I think Pianca is always heading towards this. He's always looking for this sort of rhetoric, this sort of making this music into sort of speech, you know, like it's someone talking, and he'll like vary his approaches enough so that he's almost using rhetorical rules, it feels like, to get this music across, and this makes it really enjoyable to me. Third track, Gagliarda 3. A Galliard is a dance, a very popular dance of the time. There are a lot of songs, Italian songs, about the Galliard. There's a famous Neapolitan one called Chi la Gagliarda, which is about these three, I guess this dancing master that comes into town and tries to teach all the girls how to do the Galliard. He's calling them to come to his class. All right, so this is a change of pace. The Galliard, because it's a popular dance, it's kind of rather square in its phrasing, because it's got to fit the steps. It was popular in the Renaissance and Baroque era, and it was very popular in Italy. The phrases are short and square, but the melody is appealing. They always are on these. The cavern, and they're pretty memorable. The cavernous room sound is more apparent here, and Pianca projects the antique feel of this piece, something I really appreciated. I really like that it sounds old, because it is. Kind of gives you this feeling of something being played long ago. All right, we switch composers now. Pietro Paolo Raimondo, toccata again. A toccata means toccata means to touch. So a toccata is like you're demonstrating your touch technique, your touch on the instrument. Okay, so this one starts slowly and rather darkly in the minor key. So a big change of pace from the first three pieces that we heard. I really enjoyed on this one the finger work in the main passages, accompanied by a strong bass line. Remember, he's playing all this by himself. Pianca articulates both parts well and provides plenty of contrast to maintain interest. And again, I mentioned here, he's a very rhetorical player. This word keeps coming up for me. It's like he's speaking everything. He's trying to phrase things as though they're sentences and they're trying to make a point, except that there are no words. You're just hearing these sounds. But you can hear that. And that makes certain lines stand out by accenting entire sections of phrases. It grabs the ear, and that's really important, I think, in music of this era, especially if it's unknown like this. These pieces could all run into each other in the wrong hands. Next, we get another Raimondo piece, a fugue. I want to mention fugues. They're hard enough to play on keyboard instruments, but a fugue is many voices, independent melodies being played at the same time. And there's really one theme, and the other ones are sort of counter melodies. Trying to play this on a lute or on a guitar sounds really challenging to me. This particular one starts with a spare theme that resonates in the space. The fugue has this descending scale pattern that make the voices easy to identify for the listener. And, of course, we're in good hands with Pianca. He makes those voices stand out well. Next, I'm not really sure what's happening here. We have the composer Cipriano D'Arore and Giovanni Battista Spadi. I doubt they co-wrote this. I think Spadi probably adapted a piece by Rore for the Archlute. Rore is really famous for his church composition, so for voices. I'm imagining this is a vocal piece that was arranged for an instrument. It's called Ancora che col partire, which kind of ancora, with still with my parting. So it sounds like a sad sort of parting piece. Someone's leaving someone else, and it was probably a song first, given a title like that. This is a melancholy theme, fittingly so, I guess, given the title. Pianca draws out the poignancy of this piece really well. He probably knows what the words are, with his rhetorical phrasing. and a subtle tensing and relaxing of the melody depending on where it sits in the harmony. He's so musical this way. He's really always aware of what the harmony is doing. He has a keen sense of phrasing that draws the ear. And next we have four pieces by Pietro Paolo Melli. These also have these little titles to them. The first one is called Capriccio Cromatico. A capriccio is just something you just put together on the spur of the moment. It's just an idea you had. A capriccio. I'm just going to do this. All right. And this one, Capriccio Cromatico, is going to be a chromatic one, meaning it's going to use all 12 notes of the scale. It's going to have these half-step approaches. The chromatic material rather blunts any impact that this piece can make harmonically. Pianca plays it rather quietly, with subtle slowing and louder attacks when a new section starts. This piece sounds pretty knotty, like it's tied in knots, especially in its second sections in the second minute. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just sort of anything chromatic is going to be more intellectual than emotional, because it just kind of, you can't really do anything rhetorical when because you just know what's going to come next. You're going to have this chromatic sort of melody. It's going to always go stepwise. Anyway, next we have a piece called Gagliarda La Claudiana. These all have little titles to them. This is a pleasant galliard with an appealing melody. They always have these. Galliards have a popular music quality to them, and they're meant to be danced to. There's an impressive flourish at 1 minute and 10 seconds by Pianca. Listen for that in this. Next, we have Gagliarda La Farnese. This has a more high-stepping quality to its melody, with some dramatically loud chords at the end of phrases. Again, very pleasant, with a nice melody. There's a gorgeously quiet cadence at around the 1 minute and 20-second mark, followed by the new section. I really love that. Pianca's strategy in this piece, and a few others as well, seems to be to start sections loudly and gradually quieten up to the final cadence of the section, and it really just feels like you've been seduced, like you're just being left with this gentle kiss of a cadence. It's really beautiful. Track 10. Corrente La Sansona by Melli. This seems rather bouncy for a corrente. When I think of a correntes, a courant, these are faster dances, and I think of them in Bach, and they're usually pretty fast in Bach's suites, but here they're not really. This one isn't, anyway. The second section has some impressively fast figuration in parts, perhaps improvised by Pianca. One of the things I should mention about this album is Pianca himself, in the notes, says that he's taken a quasi sort of improvisatory approach to this music. So he's sort of filling in certain parts with his own ideas. And I think that's part of what makes them sound so lively. And I'm thinking that we get an example of that here. Okay, a lot of these scores, they're not like Bach's scores where everything is filled in and you've got to just play everything. A lot of these are just left with maybe a figured bass that you sort of have to figure out on your own, or so that's it leaves some room for your own composition. Anyway, track 11, Maurizio Cazzati, Balletto 6 or 6. This has a pleasant dancing rhythm. Balletto would be like a dance. A pleasant dancing rhythm supports this very appealing melody. I like the way Pianca manages a rippling effect on the arpeggios just after the 40-second mark. I enjoy this when pieces do this in the Baroque era. The time signature switches to 3/4 at about the 50-second mark. This is a common tactic in the Baroque, especially in the early Baroque. This piece is a set of variations, usually with the rhythm varying. There's a harmonic solidity to this material that reassures the listener. And I really enjoy the 4/4 to 3/4 changes where you'll hear the same sort of melody, sort of, in this more dancing 3/4 than in the straighter 4 to the floor 4/4. Okay, so it's a nice change. That's sort of lightening. All right, we're on track 12, and that means we're changing instruments now. The rest of this program is going to be on the Theorbo. The first piece is Giovanni Girolamo Kapsberger, Toccata il Arpeggiata. Arpeggiata is going to mean an arpeggiated piece, and it's a toccata, so here the musician is supposed to demonstrate his awesome technique with arpeggios. Okay, the Theorbo doesn't sound much different than the Archlute. It's a little deeper and sort of throatier in its sound. If I weren't told, though, I probably wouldn't notice that the instrument was changed. In the lower bass notes, there's more of like a boinging quality to it. Like the bass notes will kind of go like boing. Listen, you'll hear it. It's like almost like a metallic boinging ring on those notes, the lower notes. This piece has rippling harp-like arpeggios carrying the entire thing. Pianca, of course, articulates the figuration and the theme well. Next, by Kapsberger again, track 13, we get a Passacaille, which is going to be a repeating bass line. This is a rather long piece at 6 minutes because there's a lot of opportunity for variation in a piece like this. Starts ponderously with the Passacaille bass line that will repeat throughout. I don't know that it repeats throughout, but it's at least suggested. It's always there. You got to. It's the basis for what's any melodies that are being played over it. We can hear the Theorbo's boingy quality here. This piece has an austere quality to it without much figuration happening in the variations at the beginning. We only get that occasionally at 1 minute 42 seconds and around 4 minutes and 30 seconds. There's some almost guitar-like repeated notes in the 5th minute. Pianca makes this hypnotic, this piece, in his steady pacing of the bass line. And I should mention in the Theorbo pieces, there isn't much room reverb. It seems to have disappeared, although it's still recorded in the same place. I think they might have mic'd this instrument differently. There's a gorgeous, tranquil ending when he squarely lands on the last bass note. More Kapsberger, Corrente 1. A joyfully dancing Corrente in 2 sections, sounding great on this instrument. Very brief, and a nice release from the previous, very austere Passacaille. Kapsberger again, Toccata 6. This starts out rather pensively, but then settles onto arpeggiated figures. It starts a more marked dance rhythm at around the 45-second mark. Again, Pianca does a lot to make sure the changes in rhythm register, with soft accents on the first chord or a subtle pause. He has a wonderful way of signaling the end of a piece via a subtle rallentando, and then this really tranquil, very quiet last chord. It's so beautiful. I just love it so much. Please enjoy that when you hear this recording. Track 16, Kapsberger again, Villanella. This is a Mentre nel mondo che lusinghier. This is a sort of Neapolitan song, I think, Villanella. A song with droning chords in the bass. This is really a nice sound on the Theorbo. It's a repetitive song, but we're in good hands. Pianca varies each verse with his volume, tone, and occasionally improvisation on the material. And this is enjoyable for that. More Kapsberger, Gagliarda 13. A darker tone in this Galliard, which is, I think, unusual, but it has the usual grace to its melody. There's some repeated note technique in there, and a great bass sound on the last note, very deep on this instrument. The last Kapsberger piece, Corrente 7 Chromatica. This one's is chromatic. The chromaticism makes this interesting in this case. It's unexpected, despite the title, and sounds like a modern song in the way the melody uses chromatic passing notes between key notes in the melody.
I wrote sounds modern also when on my notes for this one,
This just really leapt out. Really, it sounded really like it didn't belong in this period. Yeah. In the 2nd minute, we hear the melody with harmonic notes as well, probably in thirds. My ear training is gone to hell. I used to know these things just by the way they sounded, not because I had particularly good ears, but just from repetitive listening. Okay, the rest. So that's that's track 18. Listen to that. It's like a modern 20th century work. Yeah. It's really odd to hear. All right, the rest of the program is all Alessandro Piccinini on the Theorbo. He opened the program and now he's going to close it. So Toccata 7. A light, dramatic flourish at the beginning as the piece searches for its shape. The piece pretty much wanders through its length, throughout it, the entire length of the piece, to certain chords. It's got some deep-sounding resonating bass, which is what I found memorable about it, as well as its dramatic feel. This is track 19. When I hear works like this, I kind of think of, because it feels like there's this structure of these chords, and you have to get from one chord to the other chord with the melody, and I feel like that's being improvised or something. But it's really kind of funny. I almost feel like it's like you've got this one. You're trying to get from one place to the next, and you have to cross this wide space to get there. It kind of feels like that to me when I hear these kind of pieces. There were a lot of them in the early Italian Baroque. You hear a lot of this sort of technique. Track 20, Gagliarda 3. This stays low on the instrument and feels heavier than most Galliards as a result. No worries, though. Pianca is light with his fingers, and this piece dances. There are some strumming of chords as well in this, which is something we don't hear on the Theorbo very often. Track 21, Toccata 4 by Piccinini. Ringing bass notes set the anchor for the rising, searching thematic material. This almost feels like the theme is putting down tent pegs in the secure harmonic places. The bass would be the tent pegs. And once established, there's a lot of virtuosic repeated notes to the end. So listen to that. Bass notes as tent pegs for the melody, which is the tent. It's my image for this. Track 22, Piccinini, Aria di Follia Romanesca. Okay, there you go. Follia Romanesca. We remember the Follia is sort of a set of it's a chord progression and even a melody at times that's improvised over. And you can think of it as like the blues, the Baroque blues, the Follia. Okay, I guess. And the Romanesca one is a very particular one that was used often. This is a brief piece, but this sets a melody over the Follia chords. It's lively and appealing. Okay, track 23, Toccata 11, starts tentatively, feeling its way into a theme and a set of chords. A very pretty, light theme is established by 1 minute and 35 seconds or so. The surprising dark harmony, or a surprising dark harmony, begins at 1 minute and 50 seconds, and we get some interesting chords following in order to get out of it. We're in this dark place, and you really take some chances with these chords. It sounds great. By 2 minutes and 23 seconds, we're in something more confident, and we stay there to the end. That's track 23. Track 24, we're getting towards the end now. Quartet 2, a very brief piece, energetic, light, and bright. And then the final piece, Chaconne. A chaconne, or chaconne, is like a Passacaille. They're basically a bass line that you're improvising over. This one's brief with a repetitive opening theme. It keeps its rather shy, happy feel throughout, and we're finished with that piece. Anyway, I thought this album was really enjoyable, especially the Theorbo playing solo, that's from track 12 on, as it's often heard as the accompanying instrument. I really like Pianca's lovely shaping of phrases and his way of quietening the melody, quietening the melody. As I don't say that word often. I don't know. There's some words you just read all the time, you never say them. The melody as it heads towards a cadence. I really love that. It just pulled my heartstrings. I liked it a lot. He adds a sense of satisfied tranquility to the works when he does this, and he manages to bring a lot out of these works with his phrasing. Every line and even the shortest pieces are interpreted like melody by melody, section by section. Really, a lot of attention has been played to these interpretations. Maybe the Archlute part of the program could have been recorded in a smaller hall, but it's really no problem. The playing makes this album special, and if you're a fan of the material, as I am, you really should hear this.
Yeah, I wrote in conclusion, meditative, easy but interesting listening. Spacious acoustics make it especially relaxing. You feel like you're in this space yourself. But it's recorded close enough for the detail, and then the space allows the instrument to sustain and hold out, on the longer held notes. There's a lot of variety in rhythms and composition types, and as I mentioned before, in this kind of time period, the shifting modalities and harmonies are intriguing to our modern ear, because this was before a lot of the conventions and expectations we have now were established. And so some things like those chromatic pieces can sound surprisingly fresh and even modern.
I had a composer. He's a composer. I had a friend of mine who's a composer listening to Baroque music of this era with me. This is a long time ago. And I remember him jumping out of his chair saying, "No, he didn't write that. That's wrong."
Yeah.
Because you do have expectations, I guess. sometimes you can be overeducated, I think.
Yeah, this has that nice mix of the mood, with these solo instruments is quite subdued and relaxing, but the content of the music is actually quite surprising and draws you in with interesting little details.
Yeah, I think it sets a nice late night mood too. You might want to listen to this late at night. Get some, sit in your easy chair, get someone to, fan you with a giant leaf or something, like you're in Pharaoh's court.
Yeah, this would be good with a glass of absinthe or something.
Yeah, it could work.
Heightened
I think so too.
Attentions and listen for those little quirky harmonic things that go through.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Okay, now we're getting into some explosive Italian music here. Rossini. Oh boy, what does Rossini make you think of? He makes you think of Figaro, of course, and the Barber of Seville.
Si.
Figaro. The album is called Figaro. Si. It's with the question mark and the exclamation point after those two words. This is a set of opera arias, cavatinas, duets, all sorts of things, and it's the solo project of Florian Sempey is the baritone. He is French, and this is kind of interesting because there is a big connection between Rossini and France as well. I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. In fact, this is an all-French production. The orchestra is Orchestre Nationale Bordeaux Aquitaine, and Marc Minkowski is the conductor, and this is on the Alpha label. All right, first of all, we need to talk about the album cover because it's rather comical. It really sets the proper tone for what we're going to hear on this album. Yeah. It's rather funny. It's a photo of Sempey with his mouth open, like he's got this really impressive high note in full vocalization, and while a bust of Rossini smiles approval in front of him. And it's got a red background. Check it out. The bust, by the way, is Sempey's own. He owned this one. His family had it when he was a child. In short, there's going to be a lot of comedy on this album, but no shortage of virtuosity and, in fact, characterful singing, and that's the draw for me. This is Sempey's first solo album. He's appeared on many full opera recordings. I have one or two of them, in fact. It's also a very French interpretation of Rossini's music, and that's no bad thing. Rossini was associated heavily with France during his career and spent the last years of his life in Paris. And we're going to get sort of a sample of that at the end of this program. The lighter feel all of these pieces have make one hear the familiar ones with fresh ears. But don't worry, the Italian character of Rossini's music is always present. How could it not be? Anyway. To me, the first track on this album is when you're singing a piece like this, the first piece is Il Barbiere di Siviglia, the Barber of Seville, and Figaro's very famous aria, Largo al factotum della città. This has been sung so many times, recorded so many times. I first heard it on a Bugs Bunny cartoon when I was a kid. It's just that, omnipresent. And you probably heard it on a Bugs Bunny cartoon as well, listener, if you're our age. I remember hearing this work a lot in the 80s by some of the great baritones of the day. And a lot of them, when they put it on solo albums, when they sang it in the opera, they would sing it, sort of properly as part of the character. But a lot of them used it for to show off their virtuosity. And this is a very virtuosic piece to sing. There's a lot of there's a lot of real high-speed hijinks going on. But this interpretation is not like that. It's very much in the character of Figaro. It establishes his character. In the opera, this is Figaro's entrance aria, and an entrance aria serves the purpose of introducing the character to the audience. The style of the music is going to tell you what you should think about this character, and this is a very bright major key piece. It's really virtuosic, which indicates that the character is really capable, as Figaro is. He's very conniving and has a lot of plans. He explains in the words who he is, what he loves about his life, and this aria just makes us love this character right away, as we're supposed to. Anyway, the lively tempo introduces the singer, and he sings this. Sempey sings this as an introduction for the character, not merely as an aria for display. And let me tell you, just hearing that makes me know this is going to be a good album worth listening to, worth my time. And in fact, it is. This sets the tone for the rest of the recording. It's a very appealing performance, beautifully recorded, and the orchestra sounds very warm. The orchestra positively bubbles as Sempey confidently lists his skills as a barber and matchmaker. This is one of the more enjoyable parts of Figaro's position. A barber didn't just cut your hair; he shaved you. He solved a lot of household problems. He did he did some work around the house, and he also kind of acted as matchmaker on the side a lot, as Figaro does in this opera. This is a tremendously appealing performance, perhaps the most appealing performance of this aria I've heard isolated from the opera, as it is here. The virtuosity communicates confidence, and we have that. Above all, Sempey's Figaro is endearing, very important to this character. This is just such a spectacular performance of this, and it's all in service to the music, and that's what I liked about it so much. This piece is often abused. Not here. We get all the virtuosity too. Don't worry. This is just fantastic. Give it a listen. Okay, so we move on to the rest of the program. We get another Barbara Seville duet here. Ma dite, signor Figaro, dunque io son. This is between Rosina and Figaro. Rosina is the girl that Figaro, she's going to be forcibly married by a guy our age, and she wants to marry this prince who's her age, in his 20s, I guess. Oh, I used to always root for Rosina when I was younger, but then I'm 56, I kind of wanted to, Dr. Bartolo to get his way. Anyway, the mezzo-soprano on this performance is Karine Deshayes, and she sounds great as well. Here we get the recitativo as well as the duet, and we hear Sempey in his actor's mode. He's excellent and endearing here, too, as is Deshayes as Rosina. I'd love to see this opera with them, actually. This would be a video I wouldn't mind seeing. The spirit of fun contained in this opera is right on the surface of this performance. It's really uplifting, and you have two French singers. They both have lighter tones for their voice types, and this really helps the tone of the piece. It makes it sound really light and very charming. I love this and the previous aria that we've heard. I'm won over already. Really great. Yeah, by the way, in Italian opera, there's a lot of this, subversion of the older generation, which I loved a lot 30 years ago. If you're just getting into classical music now that you're our age, you're just going to see your people get defeated a lot, I guess. But then again, they were also aristocratic royalty, and in the Enlightenment, nobody liked them anymore. The working people wanted equal rights, and they got them. Good for them, I say. I'm not an aristocrat. So there you go. Only in my taste. Yes. All right, next we get an opera that I'm not familiar with at all, La Scala di Seta. This is recently rediscovered and put together and performed. There's an aria here, Amor dolcemente, sung by the character Germano, who is Sempey here. This is a slower, more serious, though slowly, lightly dancing love song, which I'm unfamiliar with. Here I'm noticing Sempey's light baritone more, so I'm having to hear this out of context, and I really don't know how it fits in the opera. He can make it float above lightly, makes his tone float lightly above the orchestra, and he takes a nice pianissimo at the 2-minute mark for the repeat of the opening verse. Interesting orchestration, as Germano sings about being sleepy. Discordant winds come in as the strings keep dancing in the background. It's well balanced. It's a well balanced technique on this recording, a well balanced sound. I'm guessing that the character now there's another character in this aria named Blansac, and he has sung lines. It's a baritone voice, and there's no listing in the booklet who it is. So I'm wondering if this is Sempey overdubbing himself, or if it's it could perhaps be... I didn't write it down. Let me see. Who's the other guy? Yeah, I wrote these when they came up. There's another baritone on the album. It might be him. Let me see. Johan Dubruck could be the baritone because the voices sound similar. I really don't know who it is. It could be Sempey overdubbed, though. I don't know. Can't really tell. I like the thumping strings for Germano's last verse as he explains to Blansac how to complete his assignation with his woman that he's trying to hook up with. I guess we shouldn't use that term for these. They're looking to get married and have happy lives together. Okay, again, the virtuosity required of Sempey here is underplayed for the characterization, and I really appreciate that. Make no mistake, the virtuosity is there, and the orchestration is charming here with its ticking away of the hours in the strings. Again, another uplifting ending. Okay, track 4, we get to La Cenerentola, which is a Cinderella. This is a duet, Un segreto d'importanza, sung by the characters Dandini and Don Magnifico. And Dandini is Sempey, and Don Magnifico is going to be Nahuel de Piero, a bass. Dandini is the baritone, and he starts this out. That's Sempey. Stating his case with some virtuosity, Di Piero, the bass singing the part of Don Magnifico, sings in a lower register but has a similarly light voice to Sempey. We have all these light voices despite them being in the lower range of the lower frequency ranges. Both voices are very distinguishable, obviously. Great back and forth here between the soloists as Dandini reveals he's not a real prince, but a servant. The musical material and virtuosity are starting to get repetitive at this point, though. All of this is done in the highest spirits. Yeah, Rossini used a lot of sort of techniques again and again in his arias. He wrote loads of them in a single year. And, of course, it wasn't like today where you would just be hearing every one of them. You know, people would go to this performance, and in another city, those people would go to this other performance. So he could afford to, like Vivaldi, reuse a lot of material. And this is getting a bit repetitive at this point on the album, so we get a little break, which is very nice. Track 5, Il Barbiere di Siviglia, again, the Barber of Seville, the famous overture. And it's a bit of a respite for us with the famous overture of Barber of Seville. It's taken at a pretty fast tempo, even for this fast-paced overture. It comes across as urgent and rather anxious in this performance, especially in the famous bit at 2 minutes and 11 seconds, the thump 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 da 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 da. Oh, I could just sing the whole thing. It's really great. Okay, so this is light and fleet rather than heavy and dramatic at darker parts, and that's fine. It's a new take on an overplayed work, and it works well. I also like the subtlety of the bass drum when it comes in for accents at the end. A lot of times the bass drum can blow you away the way they record it. Not here. It's very subtle. It's very quiet. Its presence is subtly felt. Okay, now there's a bit of a change of pace in the program after this orchestral sort of interlude. We get a chorus from the opera L'Italiana in Algeri, the Italian in Algiers, or in Algeria. This is called Viva il Grande Caimacan. And this is with the Chœur de l'Opéra Nationale de Bordeaux. Okay, we start here with a chorus of eunuchs singing praise of Caimacan, protector of the Muslims. In this opera, there's a bit of what Edward Said would call Orientalism. Yeah. Okay, popular at the time. Who turns out to be Taddeo, who's Florian Sempey, who's on a visit to Algeria and has been appointed to the position by the Lord, or I guess the Sultan. They're calling him the Lord here. I don't really know this opera very well. The aria contains Rossini's usual dramatic chords used to suddenly change mood. I really like when he does that. He'll have this big sting of a chord that'll suddenly change the mood. You hear that a lot here. Here, Sempey manages to put across desperation and fear via his voice at various points of the opera. He's an excellent comic baritone and always appealing. We get another piece from, or this one is a duet from L'Italiana in Algeri called Ai Capricci della Sorte. Isabella and Taddeo are the characters. Karine Deshayes, mezzo-soprano, we heard her as in Barbara Seville as, what's her name there? Rosina earlier. And she's a little fiercer in this argumentative aria than she was as Rosina. Rosina also, as we know, has a ferocity to her, but not in that particular aria where she's very gentle. Thematically as well as vocally, we hear the two transform from adversaries to fellow conspirators, and we get to hear Deshayes in some vocal acrobatics, but again, the characterization is pushed to the fore by both vocalists. Okay, after this little more serious interlude, we get the overture to L'Italiana in Algeri. Various reed instruments play modal harmonies to put across the idea of the Orient, in this case the Middle East. Otherwise, it's traditional Rossini fare, played in a lively manner and at a good fast tempo. The thematic material goes back and forth between strings, outlining the Western characters and winds, indicating the foreign atmosphere of Algeria. The whole thing is predictably charming and well played. Track 9. An opera that, again, I've never even heard of, L'Occasione fa il ladro. This is an aria called Che sorte che accidente, and it's sung by Don Parmenioni and Martino, the two characters. Martino is sung by Johann Dubruck, the baritone, who is a baritone. And we're back to cheerful arias that speak of love here. Sempey's character, Don Parmenione, plans to seduce a woman via false identity. How else are you going to seduce a woman? No one's going to go for you the way you are, right? Which is common in opera. These guys always had to disguise themselves. By the end, we have some virtuosity similar to Figaro's in Sempey's line as he decides on his plan. It's nice to hear all these unfamiliar arias, I have to say. Okay, track 10, we finally hear a French aria. Now, Rossini spent the last years of his life in France, quite a few of them. In fact, I think he may have been there for, I should have looked this up, maybe even 30 years, but I might be confusing that with Sibelius. So he pretty much settled down in Paris, retired from opera singing, from opera writing, and got super fat because he was also a gourmand. Just look at some pictures of him in his older age. And he wrote a bunch of songs also called Sins of Old Age. We're going to be hearing one of those. There are loads of them. He's got like 11 books full of these like sort of French language songs. Anyway, this is an opera. This particular aria is from an opera called Les Contes Horris, and it's one of his later operas. He wrote his last operas for French audiences. This one, and also the famous William Tell with the famous William Tell overture. Anyway, this is Les Contes Horris, and the air is called the aria is called Dans ce lieu solitaire, in this lonely place, sung by Rimbaud. And in this last aria, we finally get to hear Sempey sing in French. This aria requires a constant flow of French's soft syllables from Sempey, and it's an impressive feat as he answers all of the choruses. There's a chorus, by the way, Chœur de l'Opéra National de Bordeaux, again. They ask him these brief questions, and he answers with these long, continuous strings of words that this works exceptionally well in French. Hearing this in Italian would be really impressive, I gotta say. You can kind of tell that Rossini subtly changed his melodic approach to encompass the musical traits of the French language in this aria. The character Rimbaud explores the castle he's in and finds a wine cellar, which he ransacks. There's a moment in the middle where he gets to slow down and explore some emotion. Then it's back to the races and the happy ending. Okay, so he's going to share all this wine with the people in the chorus that he's talking to in the aria. And on the CD, that's theoretically where the album ends. But there's a hidden bonus track. Now, if you're listening on Deezer, this is actually listed, and thankfully, because I didn't know what it was when I was hearing it, there's no listing of it on the CD.
Interesting.
All right, so it comes at the end of track 10 on the CD if you have the CD, and on Deezer at least it's listed as a separate track. I'm guessing that's the case on all the other streaming services too, but who knows? Okay, there's a hidden unlisted bonus track accompanied by piano. And this is one of the Sins of Old Age. It's one of Rossini's French songs. There's thousands, or hundreds at least, of French songs that he wrote in the last years of his life when he was hanging around in the Parisian salons. we can get one of the things I like about this is we can get the full measure of Sempey's tone here, since the piano is rather quiet and plays mostly staccato. It's a comic drawing room song called Le Chanson du Bébé, the baby's song. This is, if you want to hear this, is volume 11 of the Sins of Old Age, and it's number 2 in that volume. It's sung in a baby's voice. The baby is the kind of protagonist here, and he talks about how good his life is with everyone at his command. So it's like salon stuff. You're just trying to charm the ladies. It's funny. Sempey puts it across really well. I think what this does is it takes away the I don't want to say seriousness, but the heaviness, I guess, or that we tend to put on opera singers. Like we tend to put them on a pedestal. This takes them right off the pedestal. It's a salon stuff. These songs are meant to get the crowd to titter, and that's what this song does. Anyway, all in all, some fantastic and fresh singing of Rossini here. There's a contrasting set of more dramatic arias in the middle of the program to set off the comic ones at the beginning and the end, or rather, comic ones at the beginning and more like love. So, well, the last one, Comte d'Ory, is a comic one as well. The material can get samey, especially in the once you get to track 4. Rossini reused a lot of his ideas, but Sempey's singing makes it all sound so fresh, and many of these arias are unknown outside of their operas, so it was good to hear that. I personally like context when I'm listening to these opera arias. I like to know why this person is saying these things so I like to hear them in the opera. But this is cool. We're really listening more for the voice. The album comes across as a whole as uplifting, especially the opening track. As fresh a performance of Figaro's entrance aria as you'll hear. Sempey's lightish baritone is also easy on the ear. Yeah, recommended. This will put a spring in your step.
Yeah, as any long-time listeners probably know I'm not much of an opera fan, but this was fun and entertaining. I found Sempey exuberant in his performance. It's kind of infectious. And about his voice, even though I don't know what he's singing about unless I look at the translations, because I don't know Italian or French. But his enunciation is so clear that I almost feel like I can understand what he's saying, because it's that clear, and he pays much attention to the way he carries the words over the music. So I just was kind of drawn into his enthusiasm. And like you, there's a lot of material here. It goes from extremely familiar with Barbara of Seville and then other works that I've never heard before. I also liked the sort of palette cleanse of the overtures. They're spirited and played very dynamically by the orchestra, and all of the recording, the orchestra and the vocals are clear and very well balanced. So sonically, it's kind of a treat to listen to as well.
Yeah, just a winner all around, I would say. All right, so for our last classical Italian explosion album, we have someone new to me. This is a composer I'd never even heard of before, Lorenzo Perosi, and these are chamber works. We really did get along. I guess Archlute and Theorbo could be considered chamber music as well, but it's a solo instrument. We got some vocals, and now we have some full out on chamber music. Piano Quintets numbers 1 and 2, string trio number 2. These are played by Matteo Bevilacqua on the piano and the Roma 3 Orchestra Ensemble. They are Leonardo Spinedi on violin 1. He also plays in the string trio. Hinako Kawasaki, violin 2. Lorenzo Rundo, viola, and Angelo Maria Santisi, cello. And this is on the Naxos label. Let's learn a little bit about Perosi. He's a pretty interesting guy. He was born in Tortona in the Piedmont, northern Italy, in December of 1872 into a family of musicians with a strong religious connection. During the previous 2 centuries, many of his ancestors had been church musicians. And I got to tell you, being born into a family like that is no bad thing. I mean, you're guaranteed work. You're also guaranteed never to be rich, but you could be if you become a great composer. You don't really know. Okay, so you have that thing, you have that church connection to fall back on. Perosi himself held various church positions and was ordained a priest in 1895. He is said to have written 3,000 to 4,000 works. This is another one of these guys that never went outside. Okay, making him the 20th century's most prolific composer of sacred music. Puccini said of him, "There's more music in Perosi's head than in mine and Mascagni's put together." Pietro Mascagni is the composer of the opera Cavalleria Rusticana. Very popular back in Puccini's day. As a priest, he couldn't write for the stage, so there are no operas by Perosi, but he wrote operatic oratorios. I'm wondering if we're going to get to hear any of those in the future. In the year 1907, he began suffering the symptoms of psychological disturbance, that's all they tell us about him, which worsened after his father died in 1908. He had a few tragedies in his life. As his psychological difficulties continued, Perosi began to focus more on writing instrumental music. As well as various concertos, he wrote around 30 chamber works, including 3 string trios. We're going to hear one of them here. And 4 piano quintets. We're going to hear 2 of those here. By the way, Perosi died in 1956. So apparently he lived with these psychological disturbances like for most of his life. And they don't seem to have... yeah, he lived a pretty long life. He lived, I think, into his 70s at least. What does it say here? 1872 to 1956? Yeah. That's almost that's getting into your 80s there. All right. Anyway. But it doesn't say anything about his death or the last 30 years of his life, so I imagine he just kept composing. Anyway, that's what we know about him from unreliable sites like Wikipedia. Yeah, I think Wikipedia copied it from other sort of sites that I looked up because they all had the same sort of texts. Anyway, let's start. Piano Quintet number 1 in F major, written in 1930. This is a 3-movement work. This one is a bit I don't think I'd call it programmatic, but a note at the end of the score reads Rome 17, Winter 1930, infinite grief caused by the death of my brother, the Cardinal. My brother, the Cardinal, boy.
Wow.
All right, so it's a church family. Now, yeah, his father died in 1908. 1930 here, his brother dies, and he's writing this to assuage his grief. All right, so the first movement, Mosso, begins with a flourish of arpeggios from the piano and a mournful chordal theme from the strings. The theme becomes very melodic and rather Brahmsian in its approach. It's very warm. The second theme has a marking time quality with suppoggiatura-like swoops to thematic notes below the first note. There's some interesting scale figures. Now, scales are going to figure a lot in Perosi's music. He tends to get from one sort of key to another via straight scales, just running up the scale so that he'll kind of like establish that key and then get into it. Anyway, it leads to a quick resolve in a new episode immediately following. The development section uses a lot of those ascending and descending scale figures we heard at the end of the opening theme. And the recapitulation, this is a sonata form movement, begins at around the 3-minute and 35-second mark with the arpeggios in the piano heard again. The piece ends, or the movement ends, on a gentle resolve by the strings of an upward-reaching arpeggio by the piano. It's a very somber movement, melodically interesting, and very short. It's only 5 minutes long. In fact, this entire work is 18 minutes. It's pretty short. The Adagio, middle movement, begins like a Lutheran chorale, so it's got chords, and it sounds pretty mournful. So when we think about that, we hear those chords, it should put us in the mood of church. All right, the chorale was associated with singing in church, and Lutherans sang these sort of hymns with these types of chords. We're not as familiar with that today, but people of the time would have known. The tone is still that of the first movement. This movement is also short, about 5 minutes and 29 seconds. Some pretty unique, almost ticking figures from the piano and strings leading back to the chorale theme heard at the beginning. At 2 minutes and 13 seconds, we get that ticking rhythm again, as the strings and piano alternate playing circling figures. Descending scale figures in the piano accompany the main material at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. There's some intriguing repeating string figuration at 4 minutes and 30 seconds, with a unique tone as the piano loudly chimes out chorale-like chords. A gentle, quiet cadence is approached, only to have the piano thump out the resolving chord at the end. I wonder why he did that. Anyway, Third movement, vivo, which means lively. This is kind of programmatic. It has a handwritten heading on the score that says, "Midday shines forth on the feast of Saint Scholastica." And then later on, there's a folk tune that's labeled "The Ambassador Has Arrived," which apparently is the name of the folk tune. There are also quotes from a mass that Perosi had written. I couldn't really identify those. I don't know the mass in question. Anyway, Perosi's evocation of this midday is achieved by bright arpeggios on the piano ringing out. There are a lot of repeating figures, and this made me think of, way into our own time, Philip Glass, surprisingly. Because Philip Glass in his earlier music had these sort of like just repeating figures, repeating. They don't do that in Perosi's music, but he gets similar sorts of sort of circling figures that he'll use as sort of the accompaniment to the main melody. And this happens quite a lot. Okay, Perosi uses a lot of sequencing to build the themes in this movement. What I mean is, the big example of sequencing is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You have the theme, da-da-da-da, and then what comes next? Lower, da-da-da-da. Okay, so that's a sequence of that figure down to lower notes. That's sequencing. So in other words, Perosi will have these little sort of melodic figures that will get moved around, and that'll build like longer themes. It's pretty easy to identify, actually. And it's surprisingly makes the piece enjoyable and easy on the ear. It's not, it's not terribly challenging, but that's not a bad thing. Perosi uses a lot of sequencing, as I said. I'm guessing we're hearing The Ambassador Has Arrived as the dancing theme heard in the sul ponticello strings and clearly heard at 3 minutes and 48 seconds. It's very cheerful. I guess The Ambassador arriving would be a good thing. There's also something like Westminster chimes in the piano theme we hear in the 4th minute. This movement has a narrative quality to it with all of its sudden changes. And that's another thing I noticed about the Perosi's music. His sections, they'll suddenly change without warning. And he just has all of these ideas that he'll kind of... He'll have these sort of repeating arpeggiated material, these Philip Glass like backdrops to the melody, but then it'll go to something else and everything will change at the same time. So it's almost like, panels on a screen or something like that. This happens in all 3 of these works. So it's not too hard to figure out his game plan. And that makes you able to kind of really absorb these works on a first listen. Perhaps the repeating bass note in the piano at 4 minutes and 30 seconds is a clock chiming out the time. Okay, there's a repeating bass note. And when this is done, we hear the opening material again, and that's the end of this piece. Piano Quintet number 2 in D minor, this is tracks 4 through 6, was written in 1931. And it was influenced by Perosi's ongoing grief for his brother, the Cardinal. This guy doesn't sound like he was much fun to be around. Anyway, starts moderatamente mosso. This is characterized by a cantabile chorale-like themes. Again, chorale are like chords, and it should give you a feeling of church. The beginning of this sounds a lot like the way Brahms would lay out a theme, but it's a lot less dramatic and more even-tempered in its dynamics. Brahms can be very histrionic at times, especially in his earlier chamber works. We hear the familiar repeating patterns in the strings that reminded me of Philip Glass in the previous piece. Here, listen at 1 minute and 35 seconds to the string accompaniment. And it eventually, that whole section, that whole swirling thing gets sequenced upwards. Again, at 2 minutes and 38 seconds, we get a chugging, repeating pattern in the strings as the piano plays the melody. At 2:58, there's a swell of romantic-sounding material. I'm pretty intrigued at how Perosi builds these fountain-like harmonic backdrops to accompany his themes. It sounds organ-like, something derived maybe from his church music. Bruckner did this, and Bruckner was an organist as well, so I kind of associate that kind of the swirling fountain-like harmonic backdrop to the organ and to Bruckner. He does it in his symphonies. Second movement, Adagio, has a brief, this is brief, 5 minutes, starts with a plaintive piano chord theme. Strings then take turns shooting melodic vines over it. There's my image there. guess I'm thinking of wine. I was drinking wine when I actually was listening to this, and I think that might have crept into my metaphorical image here. Anyway, the material varies as it goes. We hear an arching, arpeggiated figure repeated often in the strings at the end of the first and into the second minute, until a new theme is settled into at 2 minutes and 40 seconds. There's a creeping pizzicato and ringing piano chords are heard at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Gorgeous chiming piano figure in the high end at 4 minutes and 20 seconds or so brings us to the end of the movement via resolving string chord and piano thump on a chord again. It's a very touching movement. Third movement is vivo. Again, it's just really surprising. He likes this lively ending. This starts with Philip Glass-like circling string figures, accompanying a chorale-like piano theme, very chord-heavy. This suddenly stops, and the piano plays a new theme with warm chords and an appealing melody, which the strings start an interplay with. I like the way Perosi's material will suddenly morph into new repeating figures, as happens from the second minute on. In fact, this movement is characterized by these sudden and surprising and pleasing changes of melodic and accompanying figures. The ensemble realizes all of these changes with charming changes of attack and volume. They're live to the whims of the composer, and that makes this a successful performance. As in the previous quintet, there's a sudden silence after a resolving chord that sounds like it could be the end of the piece. Then gentle resolving material comes in for the remaining minute and guides the music to its final resolution. It almost sounds like to me like there's a pause, the excitement just stops, and it feels like somebody's just coming in with a broom and sweeping everything up, bringing it to its final cadence. You know, I kind of imagine that last minute is some guy coming in with a broom and sweeping everything up. Anyway, the end of that piece. We have the string trio next. This is the last piece on the album. Number 2 in A minor, composed in 1928, so before the 2 piano quintets. Also a 3-movement work. And this one, again, starts mosso, as the first string quintet did. This starts with a flourish from all 3 instruments in harmony, with a nice resolve following. It's got a pleasant beginning. Right after landing on the tonic, the main section starts. It features some drawn-out melodic playing from the violin, with the other 2 instruments accompanying, sometimes joining in for a full 3-voiced harmony. On the recording, this is really different than the piano quintets. The instruments are placed widely apart. The violin is almost fully in the left speaker and the cello in the right, with the viola somewhere in between, more towards the right. The voice, this really drew my attention a lot. The voices are easy to follow due to the width of their placement, so it's nice for that reason. None of the voices sound constricted by the recording, though, so that's fine. This is helpful when there are different ideas in various instruments. You can hear them all very clearly. Perosi is more resourceful with his material in this 3-instrument work. The violin gets the majority of the main melodic material, the cello sometimes picking it up. He jumps quickly from episode to episode, as we've heard in the quintets. There isn't much of that Philip Glass-like repeating patterns in this work. We hear some briefly, but they quickly go on to something else. There are lots of reaching for new keys via straightforward scales, just right up the scale to where he wants that tonic note to be. A trademark approach of his, apparently. The piece ends somewhere in heaven, with the violin tremolo rising ever upward before the final chord, playing multiple times, enjoyable and melodic all the way through. The andante, set middle movement, starts much as the thematic material of the previous movement left off. It's slow, with a lovely melody, accompanied by ostinato figures evaporating into counter melodies and harmony. There's a long pause at 1 minute and 36 seconds after a chord that simply disappears without resolving. It just stops. Then we get repeating patterns in the cello as the violin and viola play in harmony, reaching a cadence at 2 minutes and 23 seconds. A new episode starts after that, with the cello in the lead and the upper strings playing pizzicati. This quickly disappears too. In fact, it's pretty hard to isolate all of the ideas Perosi puts into this movement, and his music in general. It all changes so quickly, though it's easy enough to follow with one's ears. I understand what Puccini meant when he said there's more music in Perosi's head, because he does seem to have a lot of ideas, and they just come and go really quickly. There are all sorts of appealing approaches to the material. Perosi manages to reorchestrate this small group creatively so that every reappearance of the melodic material has some sort of surprise in it. A lovely, tranquil ending on 3 statements of the resolving chord in the second movement. The third and final movement is marked animato. It starts with a dotted rhythm, like dun, da-dun, da-dun, okay, in the accompaniment, underlining a dotted rhythm theme in the violin, which I guess it's kind of like a horse galloping, I guess, if you get with that rhythm. With the viola starts harmonizing with, then breaks away to its own sequenced pattern. A lot of sequence patterns follow to generate the material in this movement. There's a new theme at 1 minute and 50 seconds, nicely harmonized, with a fluttering violin accompanying. Again, the quick changes of section and texture begin, always appealing and enjoyable to hear, always emerging as a surprise. As with the piano quintets, new sections are sharply distinguished with a complete change of rhythmic and figurative approach, meaning in figuration or melody. Again, at the end, Perosi relies on multiple statements of the ending chord to dissipate all tension. He does seem like kind of really worried about that and making sure that there's no tension left at the end. You hear those final chords quite often. All right, so what will tend to happen in these works is one player will get a solo and the accompaniment will suddenly change when that solo begins. And so the other players are getting a kind of accompaniment solo. They get new material for themselves. So I guess everybody's happy all the way through these performances. The piano quintets are melodic and highly appealing, music that you wouldn't mind hearing repeatedly as part of your musical life. They're easy on the ear. I don't know that they're very intellectually challenging, but they're sort of soothing. They feel good. The music is a bit quirky, indicating that this composer had some of his own ideas about music. The repeating figures that I compared to Philip Glass are probably derived from Perosi's church music. They're reminiscent of the organ. The music winds up being rather calming. The composer has his own quirks, to be sure, that act as his fingerprints in these pieces. The music is mostly romantic, but you can identify these pieces as his if you know his techniques. The string trio uses a lot of the same techniques to generate constantly changing sections of music, showing a high level of creativity with only 3 instruments. The recording is clear and bright, not terribly warm. It sounds like it was recorded in a good-sized empty space, and in the trio the instruments are widely separated, but still blend together. I think this music, it's enjoyable, certainly. It's immediately appealing. I think it's something you could sort of calm yourself to, maybe. It's got a lot of ideas in it. I'd say it's definitely worth hearing. I liked it. I'm probably going to hear it again. I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to come up with next in Perosi's music. If he has 4,000 works, they certainly have a lot of it to put out.
Well, I picked up on a lot of the same adjectives that you did. Just when you hear this kind of chamber ensemble, there's different kinds of atmospheres evoked. For me, with the first 2 works anyway, my first sort of evocation is Brahms. I found it to be heavily influenced by, Brahms in terms of melodic themes and phrasing. But that's just sort of as a base concept. It doesn't get as histrionic as Brahms does sometimes. Rather, it gets very quirky. And with these mercurial changes and his own little idiosyncrasies that are quite unlike anything else that I've heard, in these kind of chamber works. But they're very interesting. And I found it a nice balance of, it's a combination of a real romanticism sort of basis of composition, but then lots of modern reaching ideas in the way that he launches from that base and tries some kind of more experimental elements with these chiming tones and like the unwinding clock kind of image and things. So I was drawn in with things that seemed familiar and then, left to like, what did I just hear? Asking questions about that. So I like that. Yeah. I found it kind of fresh and familiar, but yet wanting to listen again to just figure out what I heard and then how it figured into the total composition. And I'm wondering why we haven't heard these before, unless they're just a bit unorthodox. Maybe they're
or maybe not knowing where to start.
Yeah, or for the time period, they're too sort of traditional, not modernly. You never know what people were thinking at the time when things are recorded, but they're definitely worth hearing, and I'd like to hear more of his works for sure.
Yeah, a lot of this music got lost because of the 20th century's foray into dodecaphonic music. That was like after World War II. That was the only serious music that could be made, and that's where classical music really lost its audience. We tend to forget classical music was really popular, especially in Europe, but even in the USA before the war. I mean, a lot of it was considered to be high culture, and people knew all the big kind of repertoire works.
Certainly, these are accessible. It sounds a lot like if you like chamber works, string quartets and whatnot. These will sound a lot like things that you know, but then they'll challenge you and surprise you with some different ideas that reach more towards modern ideas. So.
Yeah, and I should mention, like Perosi's music, when you say quirky, I think it means quirky, surprising, not quirky, weird. It's really not weird music. It's actually
just
very
unexpected.
Yeah. Unexpected, yeah.
Unexpected.
That's what we mean. So yeah, give it a listen. It's kind of a charming thing. Good old Naxos too, always introducing us to. They gave us Wranitzky.
Yeah.
now we've got Perosi.
Chances. I like it.
Yeah, they do a lot of interesting stuff. We're going to have some more interesting recordings from them, I think, next week.
Oh, good.
But I'm not sure. I got to check. All right. So how about that? We got through the classical part of the program, and we didn't hear a single tarantella. Take that, cultural stereotypes.
Only the exploding one.
Only the exploding one.
All right, it's jazz time, and Italians are always putting out a lot of good jazz.
They are. You don't know, world. There's some good Italian jazz.
So much good Italian jazz out there. We've had a lot on the podcast so far. We've got some interesting things tonight. And starting out, a recording I heard that intrigued me from the track sample when I saw that it was listed. I wanted to hear more of it right away. And this is a young and up-and-coming Italian trumpeter, Cesare Mecca. We call everyone young, but that's in comparison to us. Anyway, he's born in 1996.
Wait, we're 90 years old. We're going to be saying things. Oh, this young 70-year-old guy.
Yeah. And he started playing trumpet at the age of 7, studying with the Filarmonica Boscoronese Wind Orchestra. And by the age of 11, he was attending the G. Verdi Conservatory of Turin to study classical trumpet. So he started rather young and went on to do jazz studies as well. And here he is with his recording. This is a great title, Shiny Hearts and Dusty Souls.
Yeah, good title.
Yeah. And this is on DDE Records. I have to say, well, at least at this point, this is a digital release only, no CD yet.
Sadly, because I liked this one a lot. I'll say it right at the beginning, and I want this on a CD.
Well, more on the recording and what is coming up with that later. But as sometimes happens with these digital-only releases, there's not a lot of information about the recording and who's playing what. And although the album cover has photographs of all the musicians and their names, because we have a couple different sax players here, I wanted to know who's playing what on each track, and I couldn't find it out anywhere online. So I did write to DDE Records, and they kindly provided me with the recording information, which helped me in my listening very much. So thank you, DDE Records, for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I always wonder about that. What, they just have it in a desk drawer somewhere? Oh, let's just put it on the internet.
Yeah, put it on the internet, please. I mean, it's one of the problems with streaming is it's horrible with classical music because you don't get any of this metadata that you really need to understand. But it can also be a problem with jazz too when you're looking at new recordings. You want to know who's playing what. Especially we want to know so we can give credit to the musicians.
Especially if it's a new composer like Perosi we just did. I mean, I didn't know anything about this guy before this, and I got I was fortunate to have Naxos' very good booklet notes to fill me in on the basics about his life and music. So, hat tip there to Naxos there.
Anyway, here, Cesare Mecca Quintet. It's a group of musicians. They're from different variety of backgrounds here. I think he's active in Amsterdam playing music, so maybe that's the scene where they met. In addition to Mecca, we've got Ben Fitzpatrick on tenor sax. I believe he's an Irish-born sax player who then grew up in the U.S. and now is active in Europe. We've got a big name on the Italian jazz scene, Alfredo Ponisi, a well-known woodwind player on alto sax here on most tracks 3, 4, 5, and 6. Also contributes some flute to track 2 and then switches to tenor on track 9. That's why I really needed to have these album notes, because there's multiple saxes and 2 people on tenor. We've got Tommaso Perazzo on piano, Carlo Bavetta on bass, and Marco Luparia on drums. And this is I guess on DDE Records, they have separate labels, and the information they sent me, this doesn't show up on Deezer or the streaming, but it's the Express Your Soul label, which is part of DDE, produced by Mike Generale. Now, I got hooked on this right away when I listened to the sample track, because this is a Chick Corea tune, and it's called Chick's Tune. And I know this tune really well because it's on one of my favorite jazz recordings. That's 1964's Blue Mitchell's The Thing to Do, which has Chick Corea, and on tenor Junior Cook. And, if you look at my record collection, although on the podcast we talk about all new releases, that's what we talk about. But I think probably I have more recordings from 1956 to 1964. Those 8 years are sort of the mother lode of jazz creativity, of modern jazz that I like. You had hard bop going on. You had West Coast jazz, cool jazz. So you had, Art Pepper. You had all these great players, Joe Henderson. You had Miles Davis Quintet. Everything was happening all at once. In those 8 years. A lot of jazz listeners never get out of that era either. Yeah, you could spend a lifetime just in there. Yeah. But, this is a Chick Corea tune from that great Blue Mitchell album. I've never heard anybody else record it. And so I said, this is great. And so what this album is doing, I think it's hinted at by the title. We've got this younger generation mostly with these shiny new hearts, but in their souls, they're appreciating this great music of that era, which starts out, with this tune. And there's some other hints of greater things from times gone before, as we'll get to in the program. Anyway, this tune starts out on the first track here, drum intro from Luparia into the Latin beat that shifts to swing under the melody, just like the original. It's a great theme. This is a really nice tune. It stuck in my head the first time I heard the original. Been listening to that for 30-some years. The horns go through the winding tune, and Mecca is up first for a swinging solo. He has nice phrasing, connecting melodic lines, hitting some harmonic sweet spots while still leaving space in his solo. Next, a tenor solo from Fitzpatrick. Starts with short phrases, works into some fast lines, getting down low, a little pitch bending there too before the climax. Perazzo follows with a piano solo over Bavetta's bouncing bass lines. He chimes out lots of clear figures with exuberance in the upper register. Once more through the melody, Luparia doing a good job mixing up the rhythms and keeping things tight all the way through. Glad to hear someone play this tune once again. Nice. Then we're going to get a Ben Fitzpatrick original, Ben's Recipe. Nice title. Yeah, following Chick's Tune, probably, right?
Chick's
Ben's
Tune,
Recipe. Ben's Recipe. This is sassy and bluesy hornline phrases over a stop-time gospel-y rhythm. I like how Ponisi joins in on flute in the alternating sections of the melody. It has a bridge where the beat shifts into a driving swing for a nice contrast. Tasty tenor solo first with teasing little gaps in the phrases. He makes it dirty on the swing bridge with some biting tone. Mecca's next on trumpet with a nice lilt and some sassiness, getting bluesy into the bridge, making a nice melodic ending. They change the beat up to a clicky, even feel for the flute solo, which has a nice breathy tone, fun fluttering phrases over the swinging bridge and then going back. They stay on swing for Perazzo's piano, solo that has some nice rollicking tinkles and accented chords, and also some fun left-hand answers to what the right hand is doing. They finish it off with another fun run through the funky theme and a slow gospel-y repeat with a little more dirty sax at the end. Now, paying tribute to that era, one of the great pianists and group leaders at the time, Horace Silver, and here's Mecca's dedicated to Horace. Here, he really channels Horace Silver perfectly in the piano chords and also the tightly harmonized horn lines of this composition. It's got the requisite contrasting Latin and swing sections, mysterious minor modal tones, and then major contrasts with that as well. The melody snakes nicely, has the sax shift to some syncopated backing of the trumpet line. Then Mecca solos first, a very lyrical but clear tone. He has some nice fluffy repeated notes and rhythmic false fingering fun added in. He swings hard on the swinging sections, adding a cool interval idea and finishing with some trills. Ponisi is next with an alto solo, has some burning tone going on and a cool bluesy ending. Fitzpatrick follows on tenor, and then Perosi chimes out some nice fills at the beginning there. The tenor builds up some intensity with rising phrases and faster phrases, some scoops near the end. Then Perosi keeps it bluesy and rhythmic with a proper nod to Horace Silver. They mix up the beat nicely, a bit under him before getting into some tight grooves. He gets some speedy runs finally and a nice kind of Latin rhythmic high chiming idea in there as well. Very nice piano solo here. Back through the melody once more and they vamp out to the end. Again, Luparia doing nice work changing things up all the way and adding tasty fills. Track 4, Ponisi original Steve's Mood. This is a medium tempo swinging tune with a happy melody in the horns. There's a big break before Fitzpatrick's tenor sax solo that swings happily over Perozzo's punchy chords. Mecca's up next, starting relaxed and puckish. He finds a lot of nice melodies, blowing easily with lots of space. Ponisi is next with lots of double time figures and some hard swinging final phrases. Perozzo is playful with tight articulation, mixing tinkling phrases with rollicking lines, and to finish it off, they take it through the melody once more. Then we've got track 5, Mecca's Serendipity. It's another bluesy Silveresque tune with fun, slinky melody that has a lot of breaks for the rhythm section to add big accents. It's nice Art Blakey style snare work here from Luparia with a driving backbeat you would often hear in Messenger style tunes. Perosi is out of the solo break bluesy and intense with a really attractive solo. Alto solo, then slinking, adding a little Cannonball Adderley-like lick on the way. There's another solo break from Mecca, who fills it in with running rhythmic figure. He really builds this one nicely, has some fun interval jumping ideas all through. Then we get a low and dirty tenor sax solo next, as the drums drop out for a bit, leaving him over the bouncing bass and Perozzo's chords. When Luparia joins back in, he does some nice mixing up of the beat underneath. The tenor solo ends on a high wail, and they leave a big pause before another run through the bluesy and winding tune.
It was really surprising, that pause.
Yeah,
what happened?
It was a big pregnant pause.
Everybody stopped playing. Yeah, pretty amazing.
We've got another Mecca original, Color Shades. This one gets a gentle piano intro from Perosi to get the ballad started. The melodies in the saxes with nicely staggered and harmonized lines. We've got an alto solo first. It's sweet and breathy, but nice articulation to keep it swinging. Then we've got the tenor solo, melodic, relaxedly swinging as well. Bevetta's up next on bass. He has a very soft touch, like he's trying not to wake the baby. That's the feel I got from it. But he has a lot of melodic ideas and good swing. The saxes sing out the melody once again with a pretty ending and some tasty piano from Perosi. I wonder why Mecca sits out on his own ballad. He just leaves it to the saxes. But it's a nice composition. Next is a Perosi original, the Rocket Blues. This one starts with a bluesy piano line, horn answers to start out this cooking tune. They lock in together after that. There are a lot of cool rhythmic change-ups in the short melody. Fitzpatrick blazing out of the gate, doing some nice weaving around the chords before getting a more bluesy and intense thing going. Goes on for a lot of choruses, getting more harmonic kind of things, tension going outside of the chords as he goes along. The ending of the tenor solo has a cool arranged line with piano that modulates from F to G for the start of Mecca solo. He's puckish and bluesy with some shakes before some fast lines into the upper register and phrases with answering low notes. Perosi is next on piano, mixing bluesy lines, some harmonic adventures, and two-handed figures that are really cool. The horns come in on another arranged modulation at the end of the piano solo, and then it goes into a new section with a different groove and some horn figures that end and give Luparia some solo time under the piano and bass line figures and chords. The horns join back in, and they tie it back to the melody line for a fun, stretched-out ending. This is a really fun tune. Track 8 is a Fitzpatrick original, Return Here. It's a swinging bebop tune with a happy unison tenor and trumpet melody. Mecca's the first to solo, and Perosi leaves him over the bass and drums. But he does fine swinging melodies over the changes. Here we've got a kind of a, I guess this tenor, husky swinging solo, and then Perosi. He has some fun with fragmented ideas, interesting harmonies, and low left-hand notes. And then Bavetta follows with a bouncy bass solo before another bop around the melody with a nice slow up on the end with some trills from Mecca. Then track 9, a Ponisi original, Tenor's Feet. And so here's where Ponisi switches to tenor, and a la the title, you've got two tenors. It's a drum intro from Luparia. It does some repeated tension-building horn lines that releases into a bopping melody line, harmonized occasionally at the end of phrases. This sounds just like Charlie Parker confirmation changes to me. As on the title, Ponisi and Fitzpatrick are both on tenor here and solo in succession. Mecca has a nice swinging solo himself, and then Perosi shows a nice touch with clearly articulated lines. They all trade fours with the drums going around before another melody run and a final sandwich slice of the intro for an ending. We're going to end
sandwich slice
with a kind of usually end on a ballad, but they do here. Gross and Lawrence's famous tune "Tenderly," and this is a real showpiece for Fitzpatrick here, as tenor sax starts it out with a cadenza into the famous melody, slow and way down low in the tenor range. Perosi has pretty fills in between phrases. The tenor continues into a solo. It's melodic and has the right touch of emotion. He blows some cool descending lines and then gets a bit choked up midway. It's a nice kind of honest, emotional kind of a phrase there. Perosi has a solo which starts off delicately, some short phrases, and then nice legato tones. He builds it up with some weightier chords to bring the tenor back in for some more free blowing around the melody, and draws out the cadenza ending on a fragile high note and some light tom touches from the drums. Ending with a ballad, and Mecca sitting out on his own recording is a little bit surprising, but he's a generous leader here, showing off his sax compatriots to their advantage. Anyway, this is an enjoyable jazz recording paying respect to the 60s Blue Note sound and yet even earlier boppy type things. The one Chick Corea tune was great to hear again, and then the rest of these originals, Mecca showing a flair for Horace Silver-styled sounds in his composition. Mecca's trumpet playing is swingingly melodic with fun ideas. The saxes are both great, and I really like the tasty piano work from Perosi. Also nice drumming from Luparia as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of Mecca's trumpet playing. Interestingly, in the notes that they sent from DDE, it says, this is quote, great peculiarity is that this album is also in Dolby Atmos and will be released in August in spatial audio, produced by Mike Generali and mixed and mastered with Riccardo Mazza in the experimental studios of Turin. Now, I'm not interested in spatial audio myself, just being a 2-channel speaker person. But regarding...
I limit myself to the 5-channel.
Yes.
Dolby Atmos needs more than that. You can go from 7 speakers to like 20. It's really crazy.
I felt the mastering of what we've got on the streaming here is a bit flat. It sounds like a natural live recording, but without much like final sheen or shine in the mastering. Is my one kind of criticism of the sound of the album. It's not bad, but it seems to be missing that final polish added in mastering. So it might be interesting to see what comes out in August if they change the sonics at all. But anyway, it's a nice recording of looking back to past ideas for fresh inspiration.
I wonder if they'll put it out as a Super Audio CD. That could be cool. I wouldn't mind.
ADDE. I'm going to send them a link to the podcast.
Well, we are big fans of the Super Audio CD and the.
But put it out on CD anyway, so we can buy it.
Yeah, we'll take a CD. Yeah, so I liked this a lot too. As I said at the beginning, it's a cheerful, swinging affair most of the way through, and there are a few ballads too. And I want to point something out that I noticed on this. Italians in general are just really great at melody, writing them and shaping them, and you hear that a lot in when Italians get their hands on classical music, especially if it's like from other countries like French or German music. They'll really accentuate the melody and really do something special with it. That's the case here too. I just felt like all the melodic playing on this record was just so spectacular, really beautifully shaped. And moving as well. Italians also do a lot of emotion, as you mentioned, and as I have direct experience of often in a bad way. But now here it's really great. There's a lot of fantastic phrasing. It's a very old school type of thing. And I thought this album was really enjoyable. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
So I want this one. Yeah.
Let's get it out on a CD.
Please, yeah. Preferably a fold-out one that has some information on the inside. Yeah.
We'll shift to something a little bit different in mood and instrumentation. We're going to get some vibes in this week with a release from Luigi Vitale on Arte Suono label, Gravity. And Vitale on vibraphone. And we've got Matteo Magatelli on bass, Max Trabucco on drums, and on trumpet and trombone, Mirko Cicilline. And you don't get a lot of players who can do trumpet and trombone. More on that as we come. So Vitale began studying drums at age of 12, and he was admitted to the Conservatory of Salerno, where by the age of 20 he graduated with honors in percussion instruments. And then from 1998 onwards, he started participating in master classes for vibraphone and marimba. And he got prize, Massimo Urbani Prize, an audience award as a young talent in Italian jazz in 2004. And then 2009, he graduated in jazz with honors from the Conservatory of Castelfranco Veneto, Maestro Pietro Tonolo. And currently, he's a professor of percussion at Liceo Musicale G. Marconi Conegliano. So there's his resume there. And this is an interesting album that makes a nice atmosphere of the vibes and all original music here. And we start out with a tune called Special Youth. Vibes intro and bass and drums join into that. It's a bit like amorphous at first, but a 7/4 rhythm forms. The melody has cycling lines with rising intervals, and Vitale adds some dissonance at the end of a line in the melody. It's kind of makes you pay attention. Trabucco stays light on the cymbals and a soft snare underneath. Magatelli is up first for a bass solo. He keeps a strong rhythmic pulse going through his melodies, playing on and on. Vitale's up next for his own solo, and he mixes runs with rhythmic figures, still keeping a relaxed feel. The breadth of the vibraphone is panned in the mix, so low is in the left and high is in the right, so you feel like you're sitting right in front of it. Trabucco is more active underneath with fills now. The drums and bass make a short break to give a softer reset for the melody theme again.
There's a really beautiful vibraphone sound to it. It's really
lush.
Gentle. He sort of taps on it. It's lush, and it just sort of like it just expands out.
Yeah.
It's really nice. There's something almost like it's hard to say, but it's got a slow sort of vibrato to it too.
Yeah, the timbre is
really beautiful sound.
You get the most out of the vibes on this recording. Yeah.
Right.
Track 2. Hurry up, please. Vibes start with a line that contains gaps that create anticipation, and Cicilline comes in with a topsy-turvy trumpet line on top of that. It moves forward with syncopated accents matched by trabucco. It gives off on a running swing, but holds up to a reset on a slower groove. Vitale solos first, and the groove continues to change up underneath. Magatali mixes up bass figures to match nicely. Cicillino's next, starting with slower figures and getting more animated when the beat takes off. He shows some good agility with his speedy lines and mixed articulations. That ties back into the angular melody carried by the trumpet with a little vibe break section to the end. Maybe you can help me with my pronunciation here.
I'm going to help you with the meaning of this, too. Somebody has to help me, anyway.
I think it's like million-year-long fingers or something weird like that.
Yeah, it's dita lunghe milioni di anni, and it means fingers that are millions of years long. And what that meant, I don't know what that means, and I asked, I do have Italian friends, so I reached out to them, and I said, what does this mean? And they didn't know either. But one of them offered an interpretation. They said it's not an idiom, but they said the whole idea of having fingers that are millions of years, the millions of years long part could mean something like time. It means someone who's practiced a lot.
Okay.
So they have like a high level of skill. Okay, so that's what they think. They don't know if that's true, but they offered that as an interpretation.
Plus, I was wondering, like, the idea of fingers versus the mallets of the vibes. You know what I mean? It's like a extension of the fingers. I don't know.
We really don't know.
Maybe we'll find out. Maybe we won't.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think
she thinks it means like an experienced musician. He's got lots of time playing.
It sounds to me like Cicillino switches to a flugelhorn on this one. And I'd say it's that and bass, which started out. It's soft and lyrical over Magatelli's contrasting, pulsing bass. Drums and vibes join in, and Vitale has some interesting fleet vibe figures working into trills and runs and tight, speedy rhythmic figures. Cicillino comes in for some lyrical backing lines and gets speedier into his own solo. He has some nice, snappy rhythmic licks and runs, showing a bit of, I thought, Randy Brecker kind of influence, which is a good thing. Vibes and flugelhorn.
That's always a good thing.
Vibes and flugelhorn weave around the melody with improvisations to the end. Track 4, White Clouds, a solo bass intro for this one, letting the ends of phrases ring out with little slow trills. As vibes and drums come in softly, the bass carries the melody. It's up high, slow, and mysterious. Vibes takes center stage as it ebbs and flows with textured drumming rather than a beat. Vitale drops out for Magatelli to solo some more over Trabucco's light drums, and then Vitale joins in with lush ringing sounds. Things get quiet, and Vitale plays some final soft chordal ideas over cymbals to end it. Track 5, Reverence. Vitale starts out solo on a cycle of chords with shifting harmonic centers. He gets joined by drums and bass. Cicillino joins in with melody lines on top and continues on with some improvisations, including a little shake. The rhythmic motion stops, and they leave Magatelli on his own for some solo bass. Then Trabucco joins back in with some cymbals when he gets a groove started once more. Then vibes and trumpet are back, exchanging solo lines in an improvised conversation. Cicillino weaves in and around the harmonies with skillful lines and chromatic ideas, tying back into some melody and then more tension-building notes and fluttering tones. Track 6, Baby Cot. I don't know what that is. You put the baby on the
It's a baby cot.
bed.
A cot for a baby, I would think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Here,
it kind of sounds like a lullaby.
Yeah, I think
I'm guessing. Yeah,
because this is the track where Cicillino switches to trombone, and it's a ballad with a simple but a pretty and longing melody, almost like a lullaby, as you say. Vitale doubles the melody in spots and provides counter lines. Magotelli gives it a light Latin pulse, and Trabucco plays lightly underneath. Cislino solos thoughtfully with well-spaced-out phrases and a nice tone in the higher register of the trombone. And Vitale has a subtle solo with soft textured rhythmic figures. And they take it out with another run through the melody. It's hard to develop an embouchure for both trumpet and trombone, so Cislino impresses with his ability on both, with a nice tone on trombone as well. Track 7 is called Ben. Vitale starts out with a tentative vibe line with some harmonic tensions. He's joined by Magotelli, doubling on a busy and rhythmic line. They split off and rejoin in spots. Trabucco joins in when they reach a section of alternating dissonant chords. Suddenly, Vitale is alone on the more tentative line, again rejoined by bass and drums into the dissonant chords. It works into a vibe improvisation over a rhythmic bass line by Magotelli, joined into a unison bass and a vibe melody to the ending. We're going to end up with track 8, A Strange Waltz for a Weird Tuesday. It's a nice title for
it.
It
certainly was.
Beginning has got some bass bowing, rolling vibe chords, and breathy trumpet cries that make an amorphous and rubato start. Cislino gets up high with some tension-building notes and then comes down, becoming more melodic. Vitale leads them into a joined motion toward the waltzing melody of the tune. Cislino adds some more fluttering tones into a solo that has a lot of gaps, hesitating phrases, and searching lines. He has some attractive intervallic ideas in his lines and stretches out with melodic ideas to the end. Vitale is next with a solo including rhythmic melodic lines, fast runs, and interesting rhythmic chordal figures. And then Trabucco has light and tight, snappy snare and cymbal figures going on underneath all that. Cislino joins back in to carry the melody to the end. And there you have it. It's a recording that has an overall looseness and a lot of space. Vitale moves through it with rhythmically precise lines and figures in this more sort of free-flowing atmosphere created by the rhythmic trio. He has an interesting sense of harmony for a vibraphonist, and the compositions have imaginative chords and original melodies. The trio ebbs and flows together with the often changing rhythmic feels. Cislino matches the concept well on trumpet with inventive and reaching solo ideas. It's a recording that gives you the lushness of the vibraphone timbre right up front in the recording, while challenging your ear with unique compositions and harmonies.
Yeah, this is a pretty oddball album with its strange rhythms, its rhythmic changes, odd time signatures, and for a vibraphone, which I often, I'm just used to hearing it played straightforwardly, which he does here, but there are a lot of quick, unpredictable changes of rhythm, melodic line. I really enjoyed most of all the vibraphone's fantastic tone and timbre, almost like this kind of like, you know how people will like kind of get musical tones out of like glasses filled with water. I kind of had that sort of like tapping on a glass,
that ring,
kind of feeling, getting this really luscious tone out of it, amplified and just sounding really great. I mean, this is in a good way. It's a great tone. It is a strange album though, so I called this intriguing. I did enjoy it. I thought it was interesting. A little bit of an intellectual, challenge there too, which I appreciate. I don't know.
Yeah, I like the harmonies.
I may take a few more listens, but I did like it.
Yeah, and boy, if you want your vibraphone to sound just right, you should find out. However, Vitale's got his mic'd up because, we both like vibes a lot, and we've heard a lot on the podcast. We've heard a few that sound great. We've heard a lot that sound they don't capture the full kind of richness and ringing of it. So
I think part of it is his attack, though, because he has a pretty gentle attack. Unlike the French vibraphonist that we really liked from last year. Who was that? Do you remember?
I'm trying to think now.
I can't remember his name now. But he was almost like he was like the vibraphone was this wild animal he was trying to slay right there on stage.
Beat repeatedly. That was cool style too, yeah. But it
was good. I have the album. I did buy that one. I liked it. Yeah.
But this is
but it's really
more of a subtle attack and more sustain, which was nice.
Yeah, it's killing me. So I'm remembering the album cover, but I can't remember who the artist was now.
All right, we're going to finish up with the Stefano Paolini Quartet. This is on IMD, Stefano Paolini, label Stressin.
And I would have made a joke about that title if it was still the middle of the school semester, but I'm not stressing anymore, so I could listen to this at my ease.
Paolini's professor of jazz drums at the G.B. Martini Conservatory in Bologna. And actually, he graduated in clarinet at the Conservatory in Bologna. Jazz music.
That would have been classical clarinet, I would think
so.
You know?
At the Venezia Conservatory in Rovio.
Although I have to say, we don't hear enough jazz clarinet anymore. That was Benny Goodman's instrument. And yet you don't hear
enough of it.
People play it anymore.
But at the age of 13, he was already professionally working with Nodola Jazz Band in concerts on Glenn Miller's swing repertoire. I wonder maybe he got his compositional sense from working on those melodic instruments, because he has some interesting compositions here. He became a teacher of rhythm, and he was a professor of jazz drums at the Conservatories F. Venezia in Rovigo, F. Morlacci in Perugia as well. And here he is on drums as the leader here. Simon Lamaida on alto sax, Emilio Marinelli on piano, and another Stefano Travaglini on bass. Yeah, and we've got all Paolini's original compositions on this album, which is another reason why I picked it. We start out with the title track, Stressin. This gets off to a brisk start with everyone coming right in. The angular melody is a tension-building stop-and-start theme played intensely by Lamaida on alto sax. There's a contrasting section that pulls the groove back to a halftime feel. Travaglini walks the bass line at a furious pace, while Paolini keeps the cymbals riding the swing feel while simultaneously hitting the melody accents on toms and snare. It breaks into a solo for Lamaida first. He's intense and fluid with a wailing tone reaching that artful strangulation stage sometimes. Marinelli rings out the chords underneath on Rhodes, or at least a Rhodes sounding keyboard. I like that they use the halftime switches in the solos too. Marinelli trades eights a few times around on electric piano or Rhodes with Paolini's drums. Once more around the angsty theme to close it out. An intense opening number to get things started.
Yeah, I guess they were really stressing when they played this piece, because it's. I said this was an explosive beginning to the album. It was pretty exciting.
It was cranked up.
Really great. Yeah.
And in contrast, you were stressing, but now you're relaxing at home for track 2. A nice combination. Here we get a more phasey Rhodes sound chord intro from Marinelli, setting a lazy syncopated Latiny groove joined by drums and bass. Lamaida floats a sax line on top, more laid back on this tune. No more stress. There's a little Rhodes interlude before Lamaida finishes out the melody. Marinelli is up first for a keyboard solo. He plays it relaxed with rhythmic phrases working into some accented chords. Travaglini gets a bass solo next. It's rhythmic but smooth in attack. After that we got a sax solo. It stays relaxed and breezy, and then it ties back into the melody with some nice final flourishes to end it up. Track 3, Cisco. Bass and soprano sax here. Lamaida switches over. Start out the lazy walking beat and melody of this tune. Actually, it's kind of a waltzing beat, I think. Paolini and Marinelli join in, and the melody has nice little pauses from everyone as it moves along. Travaglini gets a bass solo first, working up into the higher register, and then down low with melodic lines. Lamaida is next on soprano sax. He works into double time, fluid lines, and then some legato tonguing figures with nice intensity, but keeping the relaxed mood of the tune. Marinelli comes up next on Rhodes, focusing on clearly articulated melodic lines of phrases that build on each other nicely. Paolini keeps things going underneath, focusing on drum textures. They work back into a final run through the melody, with Paolini kicking it up more underneath, with fills under some final ideas from Lamaida. Next tune, track 4, Bitter Coffee. A quick drum pickup, and this one gets an intense groove going right away in the bass and Rhodes, a nice beat mixing up from Paolini. Lamaita adds some improvised lines and a wail on alto before joining in on a matching riff to the groove. It sounds like he's got a doubling electronic effect going on the sax here. Marinelli comes in first for a Rhodes solo with a dark and reverby sound. He makes it funky, adds tension with left-hand harmonies. Lamaita is next with an intense sax solo, including rising lines into screeches, rhythmic articulation, and some more wailing. Bass and Rhodes keep the groove going for Paolini to do some drum play, and Lamaita joins in the groove before they connect it back to the melody with a final funky section of harmonically spacey sax lines. A fun and funky tune.
Yeah, funky would be the word, the operative word for me. I thought this was pretty cool.
Track 5 is called Give Me 5, and as you might guess, it's a tune in 5/4. It starts with an 8-bar intro that sets that 5/4 groove. There's some nice or nasty distortion, depending on how you think of it, on the low Rhodes chords, and Lamaita blows some ideas over the intro. It then turns into a minor bluesy, basically 12-bar blues with a kind of 2-bar tag at the end of the 12-bar blues. They go around the melody twice. Lamaita is up for an alto solo. He mixes it up between fluid lines, bluesy figures, screeches, and choppy rhythmic phrases. Marinelli's next, making the most out of the distorted electric piano sound with fun running lines and some adventurous harmonic departures. Then bass and keyboards groove around on the opening riff idea for Paolini to get some intense drumming underneath. Lamaita joins in on the riff before launching into a couple more runs around the minor blues melody with a tag phrase that repeats.
I actually confused that if it's a Rhodes, it's got a distorted effect on it. I actually confused it with a guitar at points. I was like, is this a guitar? No, it's the
I'm not sure
keyboard.
If it could be like an emulator clone kind of thing. In this recording, you're getting some different effects with kind of phasey things, distortion, and what goes on, especially on the later tracks. Let's see, track 6, Anesthesia. It's a spacey minor keyboard washes at the beginning of this, and a slow and surprising 11/8 time signature here.
Wow.
Marked out on cymbals by Paolini. It's 11/8, or at least group into 6 and then 5-beat kind of phrases. Lamaita blows some ideas over the intro into a kind of R&B fused minor melody theme. There's a nice heartbeat bass pulse from Travaglini's bass. The melody has nice harmonic twists that kind of go into major in spots, and then has a really interesting accented section with a surprising lifting modulation right before the end of the melody line. The next time around is a bass solo for Travaglini. Keeps the rhythmic pulse through his melody lines. Marinelli follows on keyboards, playing funky, phrased, and phased lines with the sounds panning from left to right and back again in the mix. They change up the groove to more of a swing feel during his solo with walking bass lines from Travaglini. Lamaita comes back in for once around the melody theme before launching into his own improvisation, and they also change up the groove nicely again under him. He solos on to the end over a final hold. It's a nice R&B tinged tune and an odd time signature that they make sound and feel natural. Then we've got track 7, Generale Cluster. And it's a rhythmic and harmonic cluster indeed at the beginning, with some electronic effects added on both the keys and sax. Paolini mixes it up with tight drumming underneath. A groove sets in after a minute with pulsing bass and the time marked out by Paolini's cymbals. A blues-like progression ensues, and Lamaita solos over it with his electronically enhanced sax, pulling out interesting harmonic effects to the lines. Now, this is really weird. It's like a 12-bar blues, but there's an extra 7 beats at the end of it. So it's in 4, but there's not 2 complete bars. I count 7, 4 plus 3, before the cycle repeats. You figure it out. Anyway, Marinelli's next with a keyboard solo, including interesting distortion and quivering tones. Lamida comes back for a few more rounds on sax with no effects, just straight out. And then Travaglini gets a go on the bass. Lamida joins back for another few rounds of the melody with effects. This is maybe the most experimental one here.
You could say it's an out there track. I even said the whole thing sounds like outer space.
Yeah.
Perhaps the cluster of the title is a star cluster. It was pretty out there.
It was interesting. It's blues, but I'm not sure about those lengths. It seems like there's 4 and 3 between them. Anyway, they held it all together, however that they can do that. Track 8 is Scooby-Doo, but not Where Are You Now?
Yeah, not the famous Scooby-Doo theme that rock bands like to play.
This is a minor swinging 6/8 modal tune, minor modal with Marinelli, switching to organ, or at least like a organ clone kind of sound here. Paolini has a nice groove going in the cymbals. Lamida improvises over the 8-bar intro, then takes the melody that has similar phrases repeating but the endings alternate in the melody. Lamida continues on in a solo over the minor modal progression, mixing up running lines and more tension-building slower phrases with his edgy tone. Marinelli gets an organ solo next, lots of chasing lines, and then some intense higher chords, ending with some descending phrases. Lamida brings back the melody for another round, then continues on with some improvisations while Paolini mixes up some nice drumming underneath it until it fades out. And we're going to end up with the final track 9, 3 and 4. Marinelli whips up a Latin keyboard intro here of a chord progression, very rhythmic. Paolini adds fills on the toms for a Latin-y feel, Travaglini a bass pulse, until Lamida comes in on the melody on soprano sax. Very nice cymbal work and clicky groove underneath by Paolini, mixing it up with tom fills too. Lamida continues on with a soprano solo, having some fun in the upper register, and then lots of fluid lines locking into the Latin beat nicely. Marinelli is next on a rhythmic electric piano solo. Lamida goes around the melody once more, and then they take it into the Latin intro piano part to vamp out, with Paolini beating it out on the drums underneath until it fades away. This is a fun recording, lots of variety in Paolini's original compositions. There's some really tricky meter ideas going on, changing grooves underneath everything, but everyone locks in together. Lamida's alto sax adds intensity with his cutting-edge tone. When he wants it, he can just have that searing kind of intensity to it. And he also switches to soprano on a couple tunes that adds more variety. Paolini shows off nice drumming technique, but overall more finesse, I feel. He's not a heavy hitter, but listen to the subtleties in his playing. The little fills and textures along the way shows that he's a very musical drummer, and his sense of composition also impressive. For a drummer, the interesting harmonic ideas in his drums add nice textures to everything. I like the overall energetic performances here. It's an exciting album. Leads you through some lots of different feels and interesting arrangements.
Yeah, I tend to favor finesse players over power players, although I like too. Both. But finesse always kind of gets me. This is a really appealing album. There's a lot of variety, as you said. The playing is just fantastic all the way through, I thought. And I actually liked the experimentation with the sounds. Some of them were really odd, kind of fun. But I kind of thought it was fun. The one annoying thing, we say this every once in a while, but I don't like when you fade a track on a jazz song. Especially Scooby-Doo fades on a solo. That's what was going to happen. Well, probably nothing. Well, they would have put it on. They would have let it go through. But that always gets me. But no worries. There's plenty to enjoy, and that's what they decided to do. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I liked it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I liked all these recordings. So there's a lot of variety here. And what I like, we've checked out lots of European jazz on the podcast, and different places have different scenes going on. There's certainly always a lot of stuff going on in France, all over Scandinavian countries, and Italy. And there's a lot of variety in each of those scenes, too. Especially in Italy, I think there's a lot of people doing different kinds of styles and adding a lot of new kind of directions in jazz. And so I'm always wanting to check out what's going on. And you've got multi-generations. doing different things and then collaborating together, which is nice. And I think that is going to keep, fresh infusion into what's going on. So I've always got to keep my finger on the pulse of, Italian jazz things, because there's a lot of recordings coming out all the time.
Yeah, as with the classical music of the Baroque era, they are virtuosic and highly melodic. They really favor those two things. Yeah. And it's really happening there too. Well, you can kind of tell that it's now nighttime here in Japan. We start in the evening and tend to end in the dark because the cicadas have now gone quiet. I rather like that about the cicadas. They go to bed when you do. They don't start making noise until the sun's out.
Otherwise, it's too hot to keep the window open and sleep this time of year. But it's good that they give you a little bit of peace.
Yeah, that is nice of them.
So today is a little extension of our tour, Italy. What are we going to go to next week? Are we going to do the American thing?
I think so. Week? I think I'm finally going to get that William Bolcom album. As I have time this week, let's do it. I'm really up for this. I'm ready to put it on tomorrow and start digging through that. I got some good American classical composers that I want to do. I figure I'll put them all together. It'll all be contemporary composers, actually. Okay. Some older than others, but
I think I know one of them, and I'm pretty enthusiastic about that one too. I was actually listening to the Ragtime today, and I've got a lot of interesting things to say about that. I didn't think you could squeeze so much out of a rag as he does.
As William Bolcom does, right?
Yeah, but he really plumbs that to creative ideas. I'm pretty interested in hearing that.
Yeah, more on that next week. Yeah,
I have 3 recordings in mind for American things to do. There'll be some overlap in performers, but a lot of variety in the instrumentation. Well, thanks for sticking with us to the end of episode 74 of Adult Music. Always bringing you the best new classical and jazz releases. Thanks, as always, to Rich and the team at Fast Signs, Staten Island, for our glowing neon logo. Rich always listens to the podcast. At least that's what you tell us. So
that's what he says. He listens to the whole thing every week.
Thanks very much. And thanks to all our listeners. Remember to check us out on Facebook if you want to get the playlist for next week right after this podcast is released. You can also get little tidbits during the week that'll give you a hint at what might be coming up in the future. Also, if you want to get in touch with us directly, adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com is our email. And next week, we'll go a little bit American again for some contemporary classical music, and are really new, at least one of them's just fresh out this week, jazz released by one of our favorite musicians. So a lot to look forward to.
Is that it then?
I guess that's it.